When I was 15 years old, I visited my grandma on the weekend. She lived in a small village 25 minutes from the city, and at this time of the year, there were not many neighbors living around her. She was very happy about my visit because she hadn't seen me in a long time. She made me red soup, just like she used to make when I was a child, and then she cooked me pelmeni and started making new food, even though I told her not to, that I had already eaten enough and was full. Then I went out to the yard because I wanted to breathe the fresh air of the countryside and enjoy the beautiful view of the high mountains. There lay my old dog, which was not very big and could not even reach my knee. When he was a puppy, he loved to play and bark, but now he was over 13 years old and spent most of the day sleeping. Living in the chaos of the city, I needed this calm and beautiful environment. I felt very happy. I was enjoying the beautiful view, and I was swinging on the hammock hanging between two fir trees, which I used to have fun with friends living in this village years ago. While swinging back and forth on the hammock, I suddenly noticed a silhouette in the window of the second floor of the house. Due to the darkness in the room, the figure of a human appeared completely black and waved strangely. I couldn't see very well, but I could swear that the silhouette belonged to a man. I stared at him for a few seconds, trying to figure out who was waving at me. I didn't think, at first. I thought it was a neighbor who came to visit, and then my father, who brought me to this village today and then returned to the city. At that moment, I thought that my father had not left here yet and was still in this house, but soon I noticed that his car was no longer parked where it should have been parked. After that, I decided to go home. As soon as I stood up, the silhouette in the window simply disappeared, and in its place was only the reflection of the sky. This fact surprised me and scared me a little. I just went into the house to check who was here but us, but I didn't dare go up to the second floor alone and went back into the kitchen where Grandma was washing the dishes. I asked her who was staying in this house besides us, and the grandmother quietly laughed and told me that no one else used to visit this house during this season of the year. At that moment, I thought that the black silhouette from the window was just a reflection of a tree or something that created the illusion of a human body shape. I didn't think about it for the rest of the day as I watched my grandmother's favorite shows on TV and ate the walnuts she had saved especially for me. Finally, night fell, and it was time for us to sleep. My grandma told me that the heater was not working in the other rooms, and if I wanted to not freeze at night, I should sleep in her bedroom. I agreed with great joy because I never liked sleeping alone. I went to bed at 11 o'clock at night. My grandma covered me with 2 blankets so that I wouldn't get cold during the night, and before she went to sleep, she said a little prayer that went like this: "God, give me sleep. Please don't let the evil one take my soul." I never heard such a prayer, but I didn't pay much attention to it and just closed my eyes. For some time, I slept very well and warm because I didn't disturb anything at all, and I didn't feel cold because of the 2 blankets. However, I woke up suddenly at 2 o'clock in the morning. At first, it was nothing strange because I woke up like that often, but then I heard the sound of my grandmother's loud breathing, which did not allow me to fall asleep again. For 15 minutes, my grandmother was breathing so loudly, and I still couldn't sleep. But then she suddenly became silent, and I didn't hear the slightest sound of breathing from her anymore. I thought that I could sleep peacefully, but my comfort was disturbed by the sound of footsteps coming from the living room. I could have sworn that my grandmother was lying next to me, and I could even see her gray hair, but the footsteps were still sharp in my ears. Whoever he was walking back and forth and not stopping. At that time, I was very scared. At first, I thought that a thief had broken into the house, but then my thoughts were replaced by worse fantasies, and I thought that this house was haunted. I did not speak for several minutes. My eyes were wide open, and I stared at the darkness in the bedroom door. I was breathing very quietly so as not to attract the attention of the creature walking down the hall. And then suddenly, I heard the sound of a vase of flowers falling from the table, which immediately broke. The lark was right in the middle of the table, making it impossible for it to fall on its own. All this scared me so much that I lost control over myself and simply stopped moving. I can't even remember how it dawned. I think I fell asleep on my own due to so much stress. And when I woke up in the morning, I found a worse reality. Grandma, who was lying next to me, was still not breathing, and her body was as cold as ice. At first, I didn't think that she died because I had never been in a similar situation, and I didn't want to believe it. so I just jumped out of bed and went to the living room to call my dad. At this point, I was finally convinced that I hadn't seen anything the night before, that the footsteps were real, and that the flower vase was lying smashed on the floor. Until my father came, I stood there in a daze and couldn't make a sound. I constantly had the feeling that someone was watching me from somewhere. When my father came and saw Grandma, he immediately came out of her room with tears in his eyes and told me to wait in the car. As I sat in the car and my father called 911 from the house, I looked at the house again. At that moment, I almost had a heart attack from fear because in the same window of the second floor, like the day before, I again saw the black ghost of a man looking at me and waving his hand strangely. "40 days had already passed since Anastasia's grandmother died. Sometimes we forget things so quickly," the girl used to say when she noticed that she didn't think about her beloved grandmother as much as she did when she died. Although she still cried every day, especially when she saw her grandmother's portrait in the living room, she felt relatively better. Her little brother Daniel worried more. The 12-year-old boy could not forget his grandmother. Every day he went to her rocking chair, sat on the chair opposite her, and talked to her as if she were still alive. Anastasia tried several times to explain to her brother that their grandmother was no longer alive, but the boy did not want to hear anything. He said that their grandmother was still sitting in the chair and was ready to tell him another story. Their parents worked all day and came home late at night, so Anastasia rarely spoke to them. However, every time Daniel went to his grandmother's chair and started talking, Anastasia would sometimes call her mother and sometimes her father to tell them about her younger brother's actions. Their busy parents told Anastasia that there was nothing strange about it. Children perceive death differently, and Daniel was not yet ready to lose his grandmother, so it was quite natural for him to talk to his imaginary grandmother as he did before this tragedy. However, time will pass soon and Daniel will slowly get used to it and understand everything, their parents said. Days passed, and the boy still talked to the deceased old woman every day. In the evenings, Daniel told his sister everything he heard from the old woman. To Anastasia's surprise, the boy told stories that he could not physically know because their grandmother had kept them secret throughout her life and only told them to those she considered necessary. Daniel also mentioned some facts that no one knew except Grandma. The girl began to get nervous. She called her parents again, and they reassured her, saying that Daniel could have learned this information when Grandma talked about it quietly to them. Daniel could also have seen the family albums and grandmother's little diaries, where she wrote everything that she was experiencing at that moment. Or at least Grandma could have told Daniel all this before her death. Despite her parents' reassurance, the girl continued to be nervous. Once she noticed how the rocking chair in front of which Daniel was sitting moved by itself. Anastasia thought that it was most likely the boy who had moved it, but even so, she still felt very strange. It seemed to her that the chair moved as if someone was sitting inside. She called her parents again, which made them very upset this time. Her father said that her behavior was no longer normal and that Anastasia herself behaved more strangely than Daniel. Her mother advised her to take a sedative and sleep well. Anastasia did so, drank strong melatonin from her mother's medicine box, and went to sleep. She woke up at 1 o'clock in the night. At that time, her parents had already come home, although they were already asleep. Anastasia was very thirsty, so she got out of bed and went to the kitchen to drink water. A man in the hallway leading to the kitchen happened to look into the living room and saw his grandmother's favorite rocking chair moving back and forth on its own. Daniel didn't move it this time because the boy had already been fast asleep for several hours. The girl was very scared and continued on her way, but suddenly her eyes caught the mirror next to her, which reflected the entire living room space, and in which she could clearly see her gray-haired grandmother sitting in the chair, looking directly at her and smiling terribly.